Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is
Corporations are, I think that the symbol most eagerly fitting them would be they're dragons. You know, the dragon sits on a big pile of gold and just always wants more gold. Well, that's what these corporations are doing. And I think the article, the main article that we're talking about here, which was in the Globe and Mail, I thought it was interesting that the author of that article, Doug Sanders, used the term cash pinnacles. So his point was that it's not necessarily a debt crisis that we're experiencing. It's the cash pinnacles, the fact that the richest of the rich are sitting and hoarding their money in an economy where things are cheap, and you'd think they'd want to be investing, but their fear of what they've created themselves in an unstable economy is making them sit on their money and not employ more people and not look to expand their businesses because they're afraid that people won't have money to invest. And then it's actually such a short-sighted logic.
Yeah. What organization was Sanders from, who wrote this report on the corporate hoarding?
Doug Sanders is the author of the Globe and Mail article, and the irony is, I think that the Canadian company that he quoted is actually called the Gandalf Group. So the fact that dragons are being mentioned here is it makes sense with Gandalf. The Gandalf Group's going to take care of that.
Perhaps we should call Bilbo Baggins.
yeah, absolutely.
Who better to knock the dragon off its cash hoard? Like,
I think
get Smog off that cash.
I think that this has already been worked out into a storyline. Yeah. So as usual, everything that is so transparent, at least it's popping up again a little bit in the mainstream media, and they're covering that. I'm going to post that right now to the opposition r.adio Facebook page, so anybody who's listening, if they want to go read that, it'll be up there.
Perfect. Well, that's a good idea.
There is a little bit of good news this week, though, Tony.
Oh yeah, I like good news.
Good news is that the lawsuit that the Council of Canadians has in the system has a federal court has ruled that it will not that it will allow it to move forward, and that all of the concerns that the Conservatives tried to play on, which were all technicalities, are being thrown out, and that that it actually is a legitimate case, and that it will be heard at least. So that's good news. Something to look forward to.
Right, and
we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, a little background on the lawsuit, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Do you have any information on that?
Well, it's 7 ridings, the 7 closest ridings, I believe, and it does also include the riding of Etobicoke Centre, which we know there's a separate court case that's the Supreme Court is going to rule on, I believe, next week. But otherwise, it affects your riding, Nipissing Temiskaming.
Perfect.
My old home riding, and if the evidence that the Council of Canadians are presenting is true, then we might see those 7 ridings, or 6 in this case, excluding Etobicoke Centre, we might see the by-elections and all those ridings too. So, I mean, that's the ruling that happened today doesn't actually have anything to do with the information or the substance of the case. It's just that the case can move ahead to the point where the information will be presented in court at this point now. So I think that's still good news.
This is good news because, I mean, it would be nice to see the faith that Canadians have in democracy restored before Stephen Harper makes his other 2 appointments to the Supreme Court, thereby making a majority of Supreme Court justices Stephen Harper political appointees.
And I guess I suppose the only other piece of information I could include too is that it has to do with the robocall, which has kind of turned into a cold story, but that's something that definitely needs more answers. As Canadians, we can't forget about how important that story is.
Yeah. See, it's unfortunate that can become a cold story before Canadians have reached some sort of conclusion to it. Like we need closure on that, because that our election might have been tampered with.
Absolutely.
So the fact that that's no longer a point of interest for Canadians, of course, I mean, I know how fascinated we all are with the fact that a whole bunch of Batman fans got shot up in a theater. But I mean, that's just an isolated incident that doesn't have any bearing on anything else other than the fact that we need gun control.
A topic that we're going to talk about later on in the show in a Canadian context too. So when I jumped in and mentioned the robocall, you were also mentioning a really important piece, which is how many justices in the Supreme Court Harper has already nominated, and how many more does he have until 2015? Do they expect to retire, and that he will be appointing?
2. So he already has appointed 4. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And these appointments have been done with an eye to the politics of it. You know what I mean? These are conservative judges he puts on the bench, and there's going to be 2 more retirements before his term is over. So Stephen Harper, by the time we get a chance to vote against him again, we'll have appointed 6 out of 9 Supreme Court justices.
Wow. That's no good.
Scary, man. It's pretty scary. And this is how people create their legacy, their ideological legacies, is that they can, with using these appointments, they can control a lot of what happens in the future. Because, I mean, look at how our conservative government, our strong, stable Harper majority right now is behaving. Look at how many things that they're doing that get kicked up to the Supreme Court for a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Every law that's passed by the government is subject to constitutional tests, right? And a constitutional test, the final authority on that is the Supreme Court. So, I mean, it's pretty scary. Imagine.
It almost seems to be their modus operandi, the way that they operate. Everything outside of Parliament, and let it go legal, bring it up to the Supreme Court, and then when you have 6 of the 9 justices as your appointees, well, things probably aren't going to go too far against you.
Yeah, and by the time Stephen Harper is gone, hopefully 2015, he's going to have established conservative control of the Supreme Court and the Senate. So good luck to whoever comes next in order, in terms of undoing the damage that has been done to this country, and will be done to this country. We're early in year 2 of this strong, stable majority.
Exactly. There's still a lot to come.
Here's
a short list too of some other cases that we've seen get from the Conservatives end up in legal battles. His former cabinet minister that's suing Stephen Harper and the Conservative Party. That's in court right now. The Etobicoke by-election, that's in court. The In-N-Out scandal, which the Conservatives pled guilty to, and the charges were dropped, and they were given $52,000 worth of fines. And then, of course, everybody's just waiting for Dean Del Mastro's masterpiece of bookkeeping to end up under investigation. So, I mean, they do seem to go to court a lot.
Yeah. And hopefully, well, I mean, I can see the subsequent government going to court a lot too, but except for the opposite reason, you know what I mean, is to reestablish our Constitution and Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And incidentally, it has been reported widely that the judges Stephen Harper tends to appoint are not the type of people inclined to overturn legislation based on any conflict with the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the other ones, I can't remember if it was on your list or not, but in Quebec, where the elements of the 2009 budget were overturned because it stripped government workers of collective bargaining rights.
Mm-hmm.
That's going up to the Supreme Court too, and that is a charter issue. It's our freedom of association, right? That's what guarantees our collective bargaining rights, is the freedom of association. So if we have a Supreme Court who is not likely to take the Canadian Trudeau's Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms into account when making decisions, then we have a situation in which the government is more likely to be able to violate those rights.
Yeah, it always seems to be underlying these stories too, is there's always the Conservative and Harper's antagonism with the previous Liberal positions, and in this case, like you point out, it's taking a swipe at legislation that Trudeau was responsible for.
Yeah.
Oh, I tell you, every day there's something else with this guy. And here's another, just a last quick piece maybe to cover here, maybe before we go to a song. And I'll read a little bit. I'm going to post this one up to our page too. This is from Greenpeace, and they're talking about what they're calling Harper's Shell game. And it says the Harper government seems to believe that what is good for Shell is good for the country, but Canada is not an oil company. Mm-hmm. And this report by Greenpeace details how Shell has encouraged Harper's ambition to transform Canada into an energy superpower by rapidly expanding the tar sand exports. The confidential documents obtained by Stewart also confirm that Royal Dutch Shell has colluded with the Canadian government to undermine environmental legislation in both Europe and North America. Now that's from the article, and I guess just the other thing that I don't have the articles here, but I have seen a number of articles too talking about how some other countries are now responding to Canadian companies involved in mining and those fields, and apparently Stephen Harper, his policies and the way that Canadian mining companies are running their operations around the world is starting to have a bit of blowback on Canadian companies.